It is 7 o'clock. Good to see you this morning. It has been a busy week for the Prime Minister, outlining his plan for dealing with the pandemic over the winter, an extensive cabinet reshuffle which saw some high-profile casualties, and late last night, the announcement of a security deal with America and Australia at a time of growing concern over China. Plenty then to discuss with the Defence Secretary Ben Wallace in just a few minutes' time. But also ahead this morning, he's eating less meat and has ditched his diesel car. I'll be speaking to the Archbishop of Canterbury about his concerns around climate change and indeed his hopes for the COP26 summit in Glasgow. That's at 20 to 10. And how less can really lead to more. I'll be speaking to Kirsty Logan-Townsend tonight. She'll be competing for the title Miss Great Britain, having overcome a binge-eating disorder and losing 7 stone. That at 8:45 on this Thursday, the 16th of September. A new alliance. Britain, the United States and Australia form a pact to boost their defences and share nuclear submarine secrets amidst concern about China's dominance.
A new alliance. Britain, the US and Australia form a pact to boost their defences and share nuclear submarine secrets amid concerns over China's dominance.
Meanwhile, here in Downing Street, the ministerial shake-up continues after overhauling his cabinet. Today, Boris Johnson will appoint junior ministers to new roles.
Care home crisis. A warning of catastrophic shortages unless the government scraps its vaccination deadline for the sector's workers.
We're losing staff who really care about what they do, who are really good about what they do. We're going to be employing people simply because they're double vaccinated, irrespective of whether they're actually any good at providing care.
The amateur astronauts, the first all-civilian crew to orbit the Earth, blast off on their historic mission. And the weather, fine with warm sunny spells for most places, but the rain will reach the far west a little later. Morning all. The UK has established a security partnership with the United States and Australia at a time of growing concern over China. The deal was revealed by Boris Johnson, the US President, and the Australian Prime Minister late last night. It will mean sharing defence secrets and equipping Australia with a fleet of nuclear-powered submarines.
The United Kingdom, Australia and the United States are creating a new trilateral defence partnership known as AUKUS, with the aim of working hand in glove to preserve security and stability in the Indo-Pacific.
Well, let's bring in our Asia correspondent, Tom Cheshire, joining us from Shanghai. Morning, Tom. I mean, at least in their prepared remarks, neither President Biden, the Australian Prime Minister, nor the British Prime Minister mentioned China. But let's be absolutely clear about this. China is at the heart of this deal, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%, Neil. It was striking it wasn't mentioned, and in a briefing, senior officials from the White House were taking pains to say this wasn't aimed at any one country. But you look at why Australia is getting this upgrade and why this alliance is coming into being. Given that the US, Australia and the UK are already allies, you heard from the Prime Minister, this is a specific focus on the Indo-Pacific. And that means interoperability, working a lot more seamlessly together. But crucially, that upgrade of nuclear submarines for Australia. This is a technology transfer from the US, which was done once before, and that was only for the UK a long time ago. And the reason they're doing that, why does Australia need nuclear submarines? Well, you look around the Indo-Pacific, and one country has quite a lot of nuclear submarines, and that is China. Now, despite the fact they're saying it wasn't targeting China, it is obviously at the heart of this, and there has already been a response from the Chinese side. A spokesman for the Chinese ambassador in Washington said that countries should not build exclusionary blocks targeting or harming the interests of third parties. In particular, they should shake off their Cold War mentality and ideological prejudice. In terms of building blocks, China probably has quite a lot of responsibility here. It wasn't long ago that Australia really was hedging itself between the US and China because it depended on China a lot for trade. And that relationship has soured a lot. Australia called for an investigation into the origins of COVID-19, which made Beijing furious. It, in fact, put an embargo on all sorts of Australian goods going into China, which Australia is still dealing with. As a result, it's come a lot closer to the US and to the UK. And the end result of that is this new alliance. They're talking about what Scott Morrison, the Australian Prime Minister, describes it as a forever alliance. This is a generational shift and is a really significant development in the region. We'll wait for further reaction from Beijing at its daily press conference at 3 p.m. today. I think it's fair to say it won't be very happy.
Tom, many thanks indeed. Well, let's speak now to the Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace. Mr. Wallace, I never know whether or not I should congratulate someone who's held on to their position in a reshuffle. So I'll just say it's good to see you this morning. But I wonder, we will talk obviously about the reshuffle in a second. But let's talk about this new deal being done between the UK, the United States and Australia. Look, you work at Main Building. Initialisms, acronyms are nothing new to you. But AUKUS, tell us just a little bit about it.
Well, look, what it reflects is that Australia is one of our oldest allies. You know, we fought alongside each other in the First, Second World War, in the Korean War. They are a very deep and trusted partner of both the United Kingdom and the United States, and indeed form one of the core nations of the Five Eyes, which also adds New Zealand and Canada to it. So it was a natural choice, I think, for the Australians that when they decided to shift from diesel-electric submarine capability to finding a requirement that matched their need for a long, deep capability in subsea warfare, that they would go to that trusted partner. Because, you know, the secrets of nuclear propulsion are very secret, they're very special, and therefore you need to share that with certain partners you can trust. And that was clearly what was partly in their mind when they approached us back in March.
But can we just be clear as to part of the purpose of this? China was not explicitly mentioned by any of the head of either of the heads of government or the head of state that were speaking yesterday. But clearly, nuclear-powered submarines, their ability to remain at sea, remain underwater, there is a surveillance capacity that is going to be used, and it will be directed, at least in part, towards China, we have to assume.
Well, I think it will be directed at lots of different threats. I mean, the reality is that at the moment Australia has diesel-electric Collins-class submarines. A diesel submarine is brilliant, they're very quiet, but what they do have to do is what we call snort or snorkel to recharge their batteries. They have to put up a mast effectively and can be detected, therefore, quite easily at certain periods of their sort of cycle. So while they can stay underwater, if they don't move at all for long periods, eventually they will have to come up if they're transiting or moving, and that would make them very, very easy to detect by big powers who've invested in that type of surveillance. A nuclear submarine can submerge for months on end without surfacing at all, and that allows them to have longer patrols, to further afield, but also to keep any adversary guessing, and I think that's also important.
I mean, again, you didn't explicitly mention the Chinese. We can say, however, the Chinese are taking this as a direct slight. They are livid. But interestingly, you know, the French are also livid about this. You know, literally one of our closest allies. They did have the contract to build the submarines for the Australians. I'm just wondering how wise it is to annoy the French at a time that we are, in essence, relying on them to police those beaches in northern France and try and stop the flow of migrants.
Well, look, this is not about a sort of, you know, we didn't go fishing for these opportunities. This was a fundamental. The Australians took a decision. They wanted a different capability in their military arsenal.
You can see both the Chinese and the French are annoyed about this.
Look, the French were contracted to deliver a submarine. I think when the Australians took a decision, they wanted to switch out of that and into nuclear. That opened up for them different opportunities, and they clearly made that choice. And of course, each country has to make those choices in its own national security interests, and they have taken that decision. Look, we have no intention of doing anything to antagonise the French. The French are some of our closest military allies in Europe. We are sizable and comparable forces, and we do things together. In West Africa, we are together. We are providing Chinook squadrons to help them in their counter-terrorism fight. I get on extremely well with my French counterpart. Only recently, myself and the Foreign Secretary went to visit them in Paris, and we'll continue to work. We have common interests, both in the Pacific and here at home.
Well, the Foreign Secretary now, of course, the Justice Secretary, which it gives me an appropriate segue into the reshuffle action that took place yesterday. Before we get into the specifics of it, what was the purpose of this reshuffle? Was it simply to get rid of some dead wood?
I think it was two things. The Prime Minister wanted to bring forward a number of women MPs who, he is determined to both level up not only in the country but also in my party's representation around the cabinet table. And I think it's really important you bring on talent, and I think he was determined to do that. And we had some fantastic people on our backbenches who need a time in government, and I think that is important. Now, you don't do that in a one-hour. Like me, I've served every rank in government, from the most junior all the way through to the cabinet over time, and I think it's important they get experience under the belt. So I think once you start doing that, once you start effectively changing the pack of cards inevitably needs to be redealt or reshuffled, and that's what happens.
But you look at some of the people that were leaving. I mean, you're not telling me that Gavin Williamson was sacked because he was too competent, that he was showing everyone else in cabinet up?
No, look, the Prime Minister has obviously lots of reasons why he reshuffles cabinets. But look, fundamentally, a lot of my colleagues, Gavin has done actually a fantastic job for FE colleges. In my constituency in Preston and Lancashire, we have lots of FE colleges. And Gavin really believes in FE colleges. And I think they've often been a Cinderella part of the education sector. So, I think it's unfair to say that about Gavin. I think what happens to all of us, and it will happen to me because that is the nature of the politics we're in, is eventually the Prime Minister says, I want to make way for somebody else. And as a result, you move on.
There have been some eyebrows raised over some of the appointments, and it does appear that once again the Prime Minister is perhaps rewarding loyalty rather than selecting the most competent people for the job. I mean, Nadine Dorries, for example, with respect, what does Nadine Dorries know about culture, media and/or sport?
Well, I think Nadine Dorries is actually a record-breaking. She's a best-selling author. If that isn't part of culture, well. Look, I couldn't even begin to write a chapter, let alone book. Nadine Dorries took herself, when she was an MP, and decided she was going to be an author. She's sold thousands and thousands of books. And now, if that isn't part of culture, media and sport, I don't know. What's great about Nadine Dorries is she produces culture that people buy and actually want to see, rather than some of the more crackpot schemes we've seen being funded in the past by taxpayers' money. I think one was on a programme not so long ago about something about 9/11, and I think, so she'll bring probably realism to it, but she's also from my part of the world. She's from the Northwest. She's a great, solid and competent, capable minister, and I think she'll be great.
She also voted against gay marriage. I don't know if Nadine Dorries has spent much time in theatre land.
Well, look, I think, as you know, culture, media and sport is a very, very broad range of industry. It's vast. It's not just, 24-hour news here, we are sitting here. It links all the way through to obviously theatrical performances. Look, I think Nadine will be a great Secretary of State. And I think the other thing we should remember is, Secretary of States are there to deliver the government's agenda and along the manifesto. They're there to get their departments in line, to live within their means and deliver it. And DCMS is a very important growing sector, and Nadine will be able to deliver that.
Clearly, you do not want to badmouth any of your colleagues. I wonder if you might make an exception. Dominic Raab, you didn't shed any tears over him leaving the FCO.
Look, Dominic has been quoted as saying he's delighted to go to the Ministry of Justice. He is a lawyer by trade, and what I would say is, I started my sort of working career as a soldier, and there is nothing better than being part of a department on a subject you know a lot about, that you're part of, and that you feel you can contribute to. And I think Dominic's, all my dealings with him in the Foreign Office, and he has had some great successes in the Foreign Office. He led, the integrated review and helped deliver that, which was bringing together both international aid, etc. Dominic understands the law, and that's pretty important if you're going to be the Lord Chancellor of this country.
But don't tell me you and your colleagues at the main building of the Ministry of Defence were not annoyed when presumably you were all pulling all-nighters, preparing to send servicemen and women out to Afghanistan to get people out of the country, whilst he was sitting in a sun lounger.
Look, I think that's unfair. Look, what we were all focused on is doing a job. He was focused on doing his job. And as you saw, the military deployed to Afghanistan in very, very difficult circumstances. We haven't given up on that. Let's not forget there are, in my area, in the Arab, there's some 240 people, 60 people are still there that we are working to get out the country. Over 40 have made it into third countries with their families, and we're starting to repatriate them. Look, it was a big operation. Dominic and the Foreign Office did some amazing things. Some of their officials were out there alongside ours. And I think, we shouldn't reduce this to where someone was on the night of a Friday night. I think the reality was it was a challenge for the whole international community, and we delivered that.
I do want to spend a good bit of time again on Arab in just a second, but perhaps the Liz Truss, by my reckoning, is the 5th Foreign Secretary since Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe was taken into custody by the Iranians. What hope is there that she will be the Foreign Secretary that finally sorts that mess out?
Well, I think your question is best, I'm afraid, directed at the Iranians on that. You know, we have been trying at all levels to get her release, and others who are also held by the Iranian government. There's been a change of government in Tehran. We have tried lots and lots of methods. That is ongoing. We are still trying to deliver that. That will take the whole of government to deliver. One thing I can tell you about Liz has successfully concluded dozens and dozens of trade deals that many in the media said we would never get. She has delivered that. She has a very successful manner about her when she is abroad and engaging with people, and I think that success will transit from the International Trade Department to the Foreign Office really well.
Just one last question on the reshuffle. We spoke to the Minister on the programme yesterday about it. Michael Gove has been quoted as using racist language, specifically the term fuzzy wuzzies, and homophobic language in a speech that he made, admittedly, some years ago at the Cambridge Union. Now, you may well think that this does not affect his ability to remain in the Cabinet, but isn't it about time we heard from Michael Gove something of an apology for the use of that language?
Look, I didn't go to university, so but I do. What I read in the media about universities, while obviously they do lots of interesting things, they have these debates where I think they...
This was after he was a student. This was at the Cambridge Union, but it was after he was a student.
The closest I got to Cambridge, I think, was a visit once. I mean, look, I think Michael Gove is one of our most reforming ministers. He did an excellent job in education. You know, my children's education is better for his time at the Ministry of Education.
Shouldn't we at least hear from him on this story? Look, I don't understand.
I have never known Michael Gove to be shy of appearing on media rounds. He is very, very good. Formidable performer at it. I'm sure you can put those questions to him. But fundamentally, I know Michael. He's not a racist. He's not homophobic in any way at all. He is, in fact, a great reforming minister in this government. And I'm actually very pleased that he's gone to this department because we all need some local government reforms, and we need to make sure that we start delivering on a range of issues.
Just in terms of the repatriation of people from Afghanistan, the Afghan Citizens Resettlement Scheme, what is the latest on that? We appear to be in a bit of a holding position, waiting for negotiations to take place between ourselves, UNHCR, various NGOs working in the region and other international partners.
Well, so remember there were 3 schemes originally. One was British passport holders, entitled personnel. One was the Arab scheme. Those are people who effectively work directly or indirectly through contractors for the British Ministry of Defence or indeed other parts of the British government. And then there was the leave outside the rules, which were people such as women, campaigners, human rights campaigners, journalists, LGBT community. That last group, as you say, have been transferred into this new scheme. That's part of the 20,000 plus that we will be seeking to bring here. Of course, we have to manage some of those people because we have to get them out of the country. We have to manage them either with the Taliban or indeed, hopefully, through other third countries. And that's what we're in the process of doing. We have to manage it because we don't want the third countries to shut their borders and prevent them getting there. We have to give them some reassurances, and we have to put in place the right processes. But, you know, what I can say from my scheme, the Arab scheme, we are absolutely constantly in touch with these people, the people that were called forward or eligible. That's some 263 plus their families. We've talked to nearly all of them, apart from about 40 odds that we haven't been able to get in touch with, and we keep trying. And we will do everything we can to continue to support it. As I've said all the way along, our Arab scheme is open. It will remain open. We will repatriate them from third countries. We will bring some back. Some of them have turned up in Australia. Some of them turned up in the United States. Some of them turned up closer to Afghanistan, and we are bringing them back already.
Minister, good to see you this morning.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Still to come on the programme this morning, after past, I'll be discussing the Cabinet reshuffle with the former Education Secretary, Justine Greening, and the former Attorney General, Dominic Grieve. And then at 7:45, I'll be speaking to the health union Unison about care home staff at risk of losing their jobs if, that is, they are not vaccinated. He's eating less meat and has ditched his diesel car. We'll be speaking to the Archbishop of Canterbury about his concerns about climate change and whether or not the UK can reach that net zero target at 2010. Now, a court in Indonesia is set to rule on a citizen lawsuit demanding stricter government controls on air pollution. The country has some of the worst pollution levels in the world. Our Southeast Asia correspondent, Siobhan Robbins, joins us this morning to explain a little bit more. I mean, just how bad does it get there, Siobhan?
Well, as you say, at some points, Jakarta has some of the worst air in the world, the dirtiest air in the world. And when this case was initially brought in 2019 by these 32 people, it had actually ranked as the worst air in the world at that point. So it is a problem which concerns people on a daily basis. That's why they've brought this case. And essentially what they've said is that they aren't getting the right to clean air, and that 7 officials, including the president, have been negligent in their duties to ensure that there is clean air in the city of Jakarta. Now, as we speak, the court's been sitting for around 2 hours, and my team over there are actually sending me some of the judgments as they're coming in. And it seems like it is a partial victory so far for those 32 people. I'll just read you what they've sent me. So at the moment, this panel of 3 judges have ruled that the president has to create a stricter national air quality standard to protect health. They've said that the Environment Minister is to supervise 3 local governors, including the governor of Jakarta, which is the capital city, in doing cross-border pollution inventory. The Internal Affairs Minister is to supervise and monitor the Jakarta government in controlling air pollution. Jakarta has to make a proper plan to control air pollution. There's also been some concern about the level of monitoring stations in the city. Apparently there are around 7 at the moment. They said there need to be at least 30. So lots of judgments coming in which are upholding some of those complaints by these 32 people. And to give you some more of an idea about who these people are, some of them are from environmental backgrounds, some of them are local taxi drivers who are concerned about the impact on their health, some of them are parents who say that their children's health has been affected by the bad air. And what they want is not money, they're not looking for compensation. What they're looking for is a much stricter level of control on this air pollution in the city. So they want emissions to be controlled, they want big emitters like coal power stations to be controlled, car emissions to be controlled. So it seems like at the moment today, as this judgment is coming in, it is a partial victory, and many of them are already celebrating.
Siobhan, many thanks. Now, well, let's take a quick look at the impact of climate change on the planet. The top line here showing how the UK's power is produced. Beneath that, you can see just how much warmer the Earth is now than back in 1880 when records began. Then the figure, just how long it will take us to reach that increase of 1.5 degrees Celsius, seen by many as a point of no return for the planet. And finally, that large figure at the bottom, the total amount of CO2 emissions in millions of tonnes. And you can keep up with all the stories affected by climate change on the Daily Climate Show right here live on Sky News every weekday at 6:30. But let's turn our attention now to coronavirus and the latest figures there. At 30,597 new cases were reported in the latest 24-hour period. A further 201 people have died. That brings the total number of people who've lost their lives within 28 days of a positive test to 134,647. More than 21,000 first doses of a COVID vaccine were administered. More than 61,000 people got their second. Close to 44.2 million people are now fully vaccinated. Other news now, and French military forces say they've killed the Islamist militant leader of Islamic State in the Greater Sahara. President Macron tweeted, calling the killing another major success in our fight against terrorist countries in the Sahel. The UK and the United Arab Emirates will today announce an agreement to intensify collaboration in trade, security, tech and development. It'll be launched with a multi-billion-pound UAE investment in clean energy. Interesting one, this. The White House has offered to call the rapper Nicki Minaj to address her questions about COVID-19 vaccines. It comes after the US star was accused of spreading anti-vax messaging on social media. One lucky winner has won the home owned by Mexico's most notorious gangster and drug lord, El Chapo. It was the top prize in the country's lottery drawn last night, and it is the same property where he escaped through a rain drainage pipe in 2014 to evade the soldiers who'd come to arrest him. Now, even at a time of exciting growth in commercial space travel, a rocket launch from Cape Canaveral in the early hours marked a remarkable new milestone. On board were 4 civilians and no professional astronauts. What's more, it's no flying visit. They'll be in space for the next 3 days. Does it mean we can all start to dream? Our US correspondent Greg Milam has been taking a look.
When you think they were about to make space history, Haley Arsenault and Cyan Proctor looked remarkably relaxed. So too Jared Isaacman, the billionaire who paid SpaceX to make this happen, and Chris Sembrowski, the first all-civilian crew to orbit the Earth. 5 months of training had brought them here, non-professional astronauts ready to blast off.
Copy, 1 Alpha.
Into the night sky of Florida it went without a hitch. It was a spectacular show for those watching across a huge area, witnessing with the world a new dawn in the space race. They will orbit for 3 days, traveling at 17,000 miles per hour and 360 miles up, realizing a dream for the billionaire not with them.
The reason I started SpaceX was to get humanity to Mars.
It is Elon Musk's company that's enabled a story being documented in a Netflix series and with the aim of raising millions for a children's cancer hospital. These are significant times in this new space race. First Richard Branson and then Jeff Bezos flying to the edge of space in craft their millions built. Experts say the SpaceX launch is a game changer in commercial space travel.
They're going higher. They're in orbital space. They're in orbit around the Earth. They're not minutes, they're days where they're going to be there. They have actual mission objectives that they're trying to achieve. And so I think, it's an order of magnitude more of a challenge to be able to do an orbital flight.
Jared Isaacman named this mission Inspiration. With the hospital mascot along for a zero-gravity ride, it is as much about making a difference as making history. Greg Milam, Sky News.
Time now to see how the weather is looking, and most places will be fine with warm, sunny spells today, although rain will be reaching the far west later. It will be a largely dry start with just the odd shower and some shallow mist and fog patches. Overnight fog will soon clear to leave most parts dry with brighter sunny spells. A few showers are possible, but most places will miss these, and it's going to feel pretty warm in the light winds. Western Ireland will be breezier with patchy rain and drizzle. Thicker clouds and outbreaks of rain will push eastwards across Ireland and Northern Ireland during the afternoon. Coming up after the break, we'll be discussing the reshuffle with 2 former cabinet ministers who have been through it themselves before. Justine Greening, Dominic Grieve joining us next.
And now it's coming from both sides and it's moving this way. Clearly not had very much to eat at all, a lot of them extremely thin and very frail.
The people here are praying quietly to themselves.
I'm Alex Crawford and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul. Now they're trying to finish the job off so that they can move into the square. Okay, it's okay, don't worry, it's okay.
They're becoming very sensitive about having the media around.
They have no protective masks or protective equipment at all.
We aim to be the best and the most trusted place in news. Every time they touch them, they spray. This is the cocktail of drugs which the doctors at this hospital have been giving their coronavirus patients, made for people who want clarity in an uncertain world.
Perilously close to the vineyards. I can't imagine how much plastic is lying at the bottom of this huge lake.
It was my vision to come and protect wildlife in the future. Animals like lion can enter into bomas, they kill their livestock, and this leads to human-wildlife conflict.
Welcome back. Boris Johnson will continue with his reshuffle this morning with some ministerial appointments after wielding the axe against some of his most high-profile allies, most notably, of course, the former Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab. Speaking to me earlier, Defence Secretary Ben Wallace said the aim was to promote people who'd impressed, particularly women, including the new Culture Secretary, Nadine Dorries.
The Prime Minister wanted to bring forward a number of women MPs who, you know, he is determined to both level up not only in the country but also in my party's representation around the cabinet table. And I think it's really important you bring on talent. Well, I think Nadine Dorries is actually a record-breaking. Well, she's a best-selling author. You know, if that isn't part of culture, well, look, I couldn't even begin to write a chapter, let alone book. Nadine Dorries took herself when she was an MP and decided she was going to be an author. She's sold thousands and thousands of books, and now if that isn't part of culture, media, and sport, I don't know.
Well, let's head to Downing Street, site of the cull over the past 12 hours. Our political correspondent, Joe Pike, standing by. I mean, Joe, he would not be drawn on it for obvious reasons, but clearly a couple of people were booted from Cabinet because of concerns over their performance, most notably, of course, Dominic Raab and indeed Gavin Edwards.
Definitely, Neil. He didn't want to, Ben Wallace did not want to criticise those colleagues, but it's clear that Boris Johnson wants to be seen as a meritocratic Prime Minister rewarding talent. Those who've been sacked or demoted are people who have been seen to have done badly, and those who have succeeded, Liz Truss, on international trade deals, Nadeem Zahawi with the vaccine rollout have been given more senior positions. That point that Mr Wallace was making about levelling up the party is also interesting. It suggests that the push for more diversity, a more representative cabinet yesterday, may be matched today in the junior and mid-ranking appointments. Today really is about a new talent, about rising stars, about cabinet ministers of the future. Good prime ministers, like good bosses, are looking ahead to the future, treating this almost like chess, not looking at the next move necessarily, but also a couple of moves ahead. We may be looking at people who may have significant jobs today, the middle ranking level, and cabinet jobs in 2 or 3 years, perhaps if there is a reshuffle before the next general election. Interesting that Penny Mordaunt, a former cabinet minister who was working in the cabinet office in a mid-ranking role, was once a leadership contender, has tweeted very early this morning at 12 minutes past 5 this morning. She was up early saying that she is leaving the cabinet office. Not clear though whether she has another job or whether she's leaving government altogether. I should say we haven't seen any ministers coming up the street so far this morning, but Neil, the Prime Minister was working pretty late last night, so perhaps it'll kick off around 8 or 9 o'clock.
Joe, back to you as soon as we see anything for now. Thanks very much indeed. Well, let's speak now to someone who knows a thing or two about reshuffle days. Joining us on the programme once again, the former Education Secretary, Justine Greening. Ms Greening, great to have you on this morning. What do you make of it? You're obviously at a remove from these things today. How would you characterise this reshuffle by Mr Johnson?
I think he's made a number of key changes to his cabinet, and I think he is trying to make sure that it's not just a COVID cabinet, this is a levelling up cabinet that can really get on with this key agenda that Boris Johnson has set himself and the country as Prime Minister. And I expect to see that reflected in the appointments later today. There is a huge amount of talent on the backbenches, and it does feel to me like he's right to now really turn the page and bring through some of those younger MPs with fresh ideas, fresh energy, and give them a chance to shine in government.
Well, let's talk about your former brief, of course, at education. Nadhim Zahawi, received some criticism over whether or not there was going to be a vaccine passport, but has generally been viewed as a pretty safe pair of hands, and the vaccine rollout has certainly gone well. How do you think he'll fare at education? It's a big job.
It is a big job. I said I thought it was the best job in government. He has a real opportunity now to shape the lives and the futures of children and young people around England. And therefore, I think the skills he's shown overseeing the vaccination programme are exactly what he's going to need to be able to get into the department, get a grip, set a very clear agenda, not only for officials, but for his junior ministerial team that's going to be appointed today. And I hope that he'll also focus, I'm sure he will, I know Nadhim very well, he's an extremely capable and intelligent minister. I'm sure he'll also want to make sure he's building strong relationships with the teaching profession. And if you like, building that trust back up with parents and teachers that I think had very much been undermined over the last year and a half.
Yeah, and undermined, one presumes, because of the actions of one man no longer in cabinet. I mean, Gavin Williamson. It is fair to say, isn't it, that his was not a particularly successful tenure at DFE. I mean, I know one head teacher of my acquaintance who was literally popping the champagne last night.
Well, I think whoever had been Secretary of State over the time that we've had to deal with COVID and the pandemic would have had an exceptionally difficult task ahead of them. But I think even Gavin Williamson would accept that there were decisions made and mistakes made over the last year and a half, which have very much led to the decision the Prime Minister made, that he just needs to have someone with grip and vision and energy who's going to really be able to drive forward the education brief. Because at the end of the day, if you are Boris Johnson and levelling up is your key agenda, then education is at the heart of that strategy. And I'm sure that Nadhim Zahawi will be bringing forward a comprehensive levelling up plan on education that is part of a bigger plan, hopefully the Prime Minister will himself be setting out. We have a levelling up white paper coming later in the autumn, and I think this is now a key moment for the government to reset. That's what Britain's doing as we try to come out of COVID, although we obviously face some more difficult months ahead. But clearly Boris Johnson sees this now as a fresh period for his government, quite rightly, and he wants to have the right team in place to succeed.
Does he, though, emerge from this reshuffle entirely safer than he was before? I mean, Dominic Raab is a very senior figure within government, held one of the great offices of state. Wouldn't it have been better not to have him continue around the cabinet table and simply shove him out? I mean, we have seen this go wrong for prime ministers in the past, where aggrieved kind of senior cabinet ministers who accepted demotion come back to bite them in the backside.
Well, he could have taken that approach, I suppose, with Gavin Williamson, who apparently was briefing that he knew where the bodies were buried. I think at the end of the day, prime ministers need to make decisions. And I think for the wider parliamentary party, there is little appetite or time for people who've had opportunities to serve in government, serve at the highest level in cabinet, then turning their back, if you like, on that wider team and sniping once they are on the backbenches. So I think Dominic Raab now has a continued chance to serve in government as Justice Secretary. I'm sure he'll make the most of that. He has an exceptionally important role as Deputy Prime Minister, and I know that he'll want to make the most of that.
Justine Greening, great to see you this morning. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Well, let's turn our attention now to one former Attorney General, Dominic Grieve, joining us in the programme. Very good morning to you, Mr Grieve.
Good morning.
So, go on then, tell us, what did you make of the reshuffle?
He undoubtedly needed to make a reshuffle because his cabinet was not functioning, and indeed his government is in one sense not functioning well. And I'm not 100% sure that changing cabinet figures will make a significant difference unless the style of government which he's delivering, which tends to be completely chaotic, and that comes from the top, is changed as well. That said, I agree with a lot of what Justine has just said. There are some good promotions. I would have thought that Nadhim Zahawi will do an excellent job at education. I'm very sorry to see Robert Buckland leave justice. You described people being removed who were incompetent, but nobody has ever suggested Robert Buckland was incompetent in any way. I fear he's simply the victim of a reshuffle where the Prime Minister wanted to make space and decided he was dispensable. But that's not, on the whole, the best thing to do, although he's going to be, obviously, Robert's going to be replaced with Dominic Raab, who I know very well, used to be my Chief of Staff, is undoubtedly highly capable and will know a lot about the subject. And he's taking over a Cinderella ministry, which is chronically underfunded and has really systemic problems. So I wish him luck in trying to sort that out.
What, though, do you make of his replacement at the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, Liz Truss? Clearly, of course, she's had some successes working on international trade, but there is a vast gulf, isn't there, between, sorting out trade deals and being, in essence, in control of the diplomatic arm of the British government?
Yes, I think it's impossible to say whether she will be successful or not. She's undoubtedly been successful at trade. She was a very unsuccessful Lord Chancellor and Secretary of State for Justice. But then I think it's probably right that it was the wrong appointment at the time it was made by Theresa May, and it's some time ago. So again, I wish her good fortune in her work. The Foreign Office has a very important role to play for the United Kingdom. It was the same pre-Brexit, but it certainly posed the same post-Brexit. And it needs to be done competently. And the United Kingdom is losing friends at the moment internationally. Our international status is diminishing. And she's going to have to try to turn that round. I'm afraid there again, that has more to do with the Prime Minister than with her. But there is a really serious problem that with Biden's United States not particularly interested in the United Kingdom, and with the fact that we have antagonized our key European partners, there's a lot of bridge building to be done.
I suspect that you will not be desperately surprised that Priti Patel remains as Home Secretary. I'm just wondering whether you're particularly pleased about that.
I find Priti Patel's style of government not attractive at all. I have to be frank about it. I've known her for obviously years as a colleague in Parliament, but the stridency with which she's running the Home Office again seems to me to be rather counterproductive. All this business about turning boats back in the Channel, which appears to be a policy that she's espoused and is very pleased to promote, is complete nonsense. It's a gimmick. And the trouble with gimmicks is that if you pursue them, they diminish your status with the key partners with whom you're going to have to work if you're going to prevent illegal immigration, which in this case happens to be the French. So I can't see that those are productive policies, although they may make good headlines in national newspapers. But as I say, the Home Office is a very challenging job, and I have no reason to wish ill towards her in carrying that work out. But it doesn't seem to me that she's been particularly effective.
It strikes me that you're suggesting, perhaps, that as much as anything, the rationale for the Prime Minister's changes to the cabinet, due in part to loyalty to the Prime Minister, as much as competence in the role.
Well, there's certainly a bit of that. That said, I've no doubt that the ministers who've been sacked have been loyal to the Prime Minister as well. At the end of the day, the Prime Minister is entitled to change his cabinet around. And cabinet ministers may be very upset. We've all been through this, but at the end of the day, Prime Minister's got to make choices. The question is, are those choices going to really enhance the capacity and capability of their government? And in the case of Boris Johnson, I would quietly suggest that the major problem is that the leadership he delivers is extremely erratic. So a lot of the problems which exist in government strike me as coming directly from the top. If it was less erratic, then ministers would have a better focus as to how they get on with their jobs. And some of the problems, therefore, will not be changed by or improved by simply reshuffling people. It's a question of whether the style of government needs to be altered from Downing Street.
Dominic Grieve, good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Still to come on the programme, I'll be speaking to a health union about care home staff at risk of losing their jobs from being unvaccinated against coronavirus. That's coming your way after this. Now, there are fears of a mass exodus of social care staff in England if the government doesn't abandon its no jab, no job rule. Care workers have to be double vaccinated by November the 11th or risk being banned from care homes. To achieve this, they need to have their first vaccine by today. But health unions say the rule will cause catastrophic staff shortages. Ashna Huranak has been taking a look.
Do you like it? I hope so. Because your hands look beautiful now.
Delma has been a carer for 7 years, but this could be her last few weeks because she doesn't want the COVID-19 jab. And no jab means no job.
I'm not saying that there's no COVID, but I don't actually trust the vaccine, if I'm 100%. I'm not sure if I want it or if I don't want it. I'm not saying it's fake, but it's just people have reactions from the vaccine, which I've heard about.
We'll start taking a few more of these off.
Fear and distrust still felt by some of the 5 million people not vaccinated in England, including care workers who must be jabbed by today and have a second vaccine booked by mid-November. Anyone not jabbed by then can no longer work in care homes. A warning from some leaders, it would mean losing irreplaceable talent and hiring based on a health choice rather than ability.
We're losing staff who really, really care about what they do, who are really good about what they do. We're going to be employing people simply because they're double vaccinated, irrespective of whether they're actually any good at providing care. And the harm that can cause is, untold harm.
Out of nearly 600 members of staff, 40 will have their contracts terminated. It's a divisive debate on the wards, but even those who've chosen to be vaccinated do sympathise.
Do you think they'll drop it before you?
The lack of choice some see as unfair.
I can understand the reasons why they've made it mandatory, because obviously we're dealing with incredibly vulnerable adults. But to an effect, I don't agree with it. It should be everyone's option and opinion whether or not they have it or not.
Yeah, it's done.
They may love what they do, but sticking by a choice based on fear, beliefs or even misinformation could now be costing them their jobs. Ashna Harinag, Sky News, Milton Keynes.
We're joined now by the social care lead at the Public Services Union, Unison, Gavin Edwards. Gavin, great to have you on the programme this morning. Yesterday on the show, I spoke to one care home provider who estimated that shortages in terms of his workforce were already running at 30% there or thereabouts. I mean, just how bad could things get come November?
Well, look, the care sector was already on the brink in terms of staff shortages before this policy came into place because of low pay and because of other sectors of the economy opening up. And unfortunately, this policy could send some of those care homes over the brink. We've been hearing on a daily basis reports from our members and employers that we deal with that sometimes they're not able to meet safe staffing requirements because of this short-term impact of mandatory vaccination combining with the longer-term impacts. The government clearly needs to invest in the care workforce. That's a really important long-term measure. But in the short term, it needs to think again about mandatory vaccination because it's causing these staff shortages and because it's undermining the rollout of the vaccine.
You of course, Gavin, will speak to your members. So perhaps you can articulate a response to a question which many people have, which is simply this. I mean, why would a care worker who is working with clinically vulnerable older people, why would they not take the vaccine?
The reasons why people are hesitant or yet to be persuaded about the vaccine are many and varied. They include concerns about fertility, previous experience of healthcare, and also, unfortunately, in some examples, because people are getting the wrong information from the wrong sources. What the government should be doing is making sure that those care workers are able to have those face-to-face conversations with people to reassure them specifically about those concerns and also talk talk to their colleagues so that they can have those peer-to-peer conversations. Instead of resources being put into that kind of persuasion, the government's gone down the route of forcing people to have the vaccine, and that's having this counterproductive effect of undermining the vaccine rollout and causing the staff shortages.
Sure, counterproductive it may well be, but we saw what happened when COVID-19 got into the care home system last year. I think the figure was roughly 30,000 excess deaths by August, by the summertime certainly. You understand, and I'm sure your members understand, that if COVID is once again seeded in these nursing homes, it could be catastrophic.
Look, let's be clear, we back the vaccine rollout, but the objective of the policy should be to get the maximum number of care workers vaccinated as quickly as possible. And unfortunately, by threatening people with the sack if they don't get the jab, it's hardening their concerns about the vaccine instead of persuading them. In Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, the devolved administrations have not gone down the route of mandatory vaccination, and they have significantly higher vaccination rates in their care home sector. So the government should be putting those resources that it's using to implement this counterproductive policy into a focused campaign to persuade those remaining care workers to be vaccinated.
Gavin, we've only got 10, 15 seconds left. Do you see this ending in legal action?
That's not a route that we're looking at specifically at the moment. But of course, the government has opened up a situation where we have thousands of employers dealing with many thousands of care staff. And of course, that's something that can't be ruled out in the future. But look, there's a whole range of counterproductive, unintended consequences that come with this policy. But the government really should think again and concentrate on persuading care workers.
Well, let's see if they manage to do so. Gavin Edwards, really good to talk to you this morning. Thanks for being with us. We will, of course, return to the topic of care homes later on in the programme and, indeed, moving forward. Still a huge story. But for us, coming back at 8 o'clock, we'll be discussing this. The United Kingdom, the United States and Australia have announced a new defence partnership, but the French aren't happy as a trade deal falls through. We'll bring you all the latest after this.